Bike life. Motorcycles are interesting in the sense that they tend to not just be a mode of transportation for people like cars are. Yeah, you got people who are into cars and driving and modding, and they exist, but let's be honest, those schmucks are very few and far between those who just look at their cars as mysterious metal boxes that somehow propel themselves through exploding. Those people view cars as an appliance. What they drive does not matter as long as it gets them from point A to point B with the same consistency that the coffee maker turns beans into a mild strain of meth every morning. I recently watched a video that an acquaintance of mine named Megan Stark made regarding motorcycling and minimalism, where she highlights how motorcycles, especially if they only mode of transportation, promote a minimalist mindset. They are contagious in the sense that they tend to permeate other parts of your life and will shape parts of your lifestyle. For example, you're usually locked into a specific look because even though you're going to hang out or you're going to school, you must wear some clothing that's catered to motorcycles, which usually ends up being the same boots, jacket, etc. I wear a full face helmet and I'm black, so I keep my hair in the same style of twists over and over because other styles may cause pressure points. And if I let my fro out, my helmet becomes suddenly 3 sizes too small. You have to basically pack conservatively wherever you go unless you got a big ass BMW with like 3 different cases on it, and you don't really count in that sense. Over the journey of amassing experience and basically living your mode of transportation, you naturally develop knowledge and the ability to say you earned your spot in a club that is a little bit more challenging to get into and stay into at times. So what is this video? Well, I'll be honest with you. It's a video that I made before almost 2 years ago, but looking back that far, the video sucks and it's drawn out, and oh my god, have I grown as a video editor since then. So I'm actually doing it over because only like a handful of people actually watched it, and probably even half of that handful actually finished the video. And that was also before I had 1,000 subscribers, so it's safe to say, unless you've been following your boy that long, you don't actually know my story. A lot of times for beginners, you go around to seasoned riders and everyone is telling you what to do, what you should practice, and what you should buy. Ninja 250. But this video isn't really advice like that per se. It's really just my story when it comes to this bike life stuff, as well as YouTube. You know, me getting into the motovlogger scene. In September of 2015, I bought and rode my first bike. But the story doesn't start there. In fact, it starts a few months earlier as a starry-eyed 19-year-old from East Brooklyn, dodging crooked cops and running to catch the train. I live in NYC, which is a bittersweet fact when talking about public transportation. It's sweet in the sense that we actually have a relatively expansive system of public transportation, and you can basically get anywhere within the 5 boroughs with enough time. But I'm sure most of you can agree that the MTA sucks peen. I mean, like, the fares keep going up, it's filthy, it's outdated, unreliable, delays all over the fucking place. I'm gonna find that fucking dispatcher that keeps holding my train, dude. And then comes the shit show when your train finally arrives 10 minutes late. Walk into an enclosed, bumpy, stale-eared cage and pray to whatever god you believe in that you don't hear the words "Showtime!" And you'll firmly sit or stand for the next 20 plus minutes, but when you emerge from that hole in the ground, you're basically where you need to be, and that stink from the guy who hasn't showered in 15 days will air out of your clothes. Probably. Okay, it isn't always that bad, although make no mistake, sometimes it definitely is. Point is, I wanted my own vehicle, and getting a car is pretty easy, but insurance as a 19-year-old male with less than 1 year of road experience, living in a high crime neighborhood with no garage, is automatically money that I was not trying to pay. I was always a car guy, but that shit just wasn't gonna happen. So I got my first job. Fuck it, I'll just say where it is. My first job was at the Target in Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn by the Barclays Center. Fuck that place. So I basically decided that I needed to get my motorcycle license and save up for a motorcycle, mainly for the low insurance costs. I studied for the New York State permit test. I head over to the DMV, and funny story actually. When I walked in and asked for the motorcycle test, the lady mindlessly handed me the car test, which is probably a testament to how few people actually visit to take the motorcycle test. I mean, half of these dudes riding around here ain't got no motorcycle license anyway, so, but that's none of my business. I realized halfway through that I might be taking a car test, but decided to finish it, you know? Like, maybe it was the same test for both. I don't know. So I finish, I walk up like, hey, is this the motorcycle test or the car test? She looks at it and says, oh wait, this is the car test. And just for fun, she grades it, and then she congratulates me on passing it again. And we both laughed it off, and I sat down and passed the motorcycle exam too. Yes, that's also a testament to how easy the car test is, because I passed it again like years later after taking it the first time. So that was the permit test. The next step was to get the license. And the thing is, no one close to me was a motorcyclist at the time, so I had to take the MSF course route. I took the course on 2 hot, sunny days in either late July or early August. I can't remember which one. I sunburned on the nose somehow. Like, I had no idea that black people could sunburn, but apparently we can after 6 or so hours in the fucking summer sun. My class was super diverse too. We even had a Chinese chick, a British dude, and there was one guy who was taking a course for insurance discounts and already had his license. He rode like a CB 500F or something like that, one of the new ones. I swear, every time he pulled up or left the class, everyone was just like, whoa. Anyway, everyone in my class passed the exam, which was a written test that the teachers don't even take seriously. Like, they basically just left the room and they were like, don't cheat, wink wink. The other parts were the more like real parts that they actually cared about. which was the tests on a bike, which consisted of cornering, an emergency stop from second gear, an emergency swerve, and the dreaded figure 8 box. Most people fucked up the figure 8 box, but the others are basically so easy that you make up the points, you know? So I got my waiver, I went back to the DMV, and I got the license. Step 2 was done. Third step was to get a bike, obviously. Now, I was under the impression that bikes would be largely cheaper than cars because of the scale of the vehicle that you're paying for. Oh, how naive. That's not really the case out here in the city. Plus, I was working with a relatively small amount of money. I had my eyes set on the updated model for the Ninja 250R, you know, the one that I think ran from like 2009, and I think they just stopped making them for the 300. I wanted one because I used to watch, 13 More Death, M13, one of the like OG motovloggers. I used to watch him quite a bit back in junior high school when I was a kid. So he definitely made me a fan of that bike. And, you know, in my head, I'm like, that's my first bike. It's modern, it's good looking, it sounds kind of cool, and basically they're like the ultimate beginner bike. You know, anybody who says,
what bike should I start on?
The Ninja 250. Unfortunately, most people posting those things on Craigslist want at least $2,000 for a good one. And this was back in like 2015. They might have gone down a little bit. And then any of the odd deals that sprang up were basically scooped up before I could even blink. It's like the bike was in season. But it's a beginner bike, so I guess it's always in season, you know? But I started to get discouraged about the bike that I wanted since I was a little twerp. So I'm like, fuck it, I'll just settle for the Ninja 250 design from the 80s because at this point, I just want a bike. So reluctantly, I started looking for those old, boxy, ugly, dated Ninjas. And I took solace in the fact that they're not functionally that much different from the facelifted one. Eventually, I found this lady out in Jersey who had one for sale. It was this purple one from the late 90s. We spoke back and forth for a little while, and she sent me a video with a bike, but the thing is, I was a noob at trying to buy vehicles. So I started asking for way too many favors from her. If she could deliver the bike or if she could lend me her plate so I could ride it home from Jersey. I offered to pay a little more for that, obviously, but you know, people, even with that incentive, don't really like to go out of their way. She started to communicate less and spoke with people who were lined up to see the bike while giving a ton of excuses. And then finally, when a plan was worked out, she basically flopped, you know? Eventually, she actually wrote me back, but by that point, I had been fed up and I didn't even bother responding. To be honest with you, what I figured had happened was that the people that she had lined up to see the bike didn't like the bike, so she came back around to me as a last resort, but by that point I already moved on. Now, I spoke to several people in the city, you know, usual fucking Craigslist lot, floppers, dickheads who leave the ad up when the bike is already sold, MIA posters. The thing about it is, like, I felt like the Ninja 250 was cursed or some shit. Like, fine, I'll look for anything at this point because my main goal was to have this damn bike before school starts. At that point, I came across a Kawasaki ZL600 Eliminator. Now, prior to this, I never heard of the bike before, but a short Google search made me an instant fan of the bike. It's basically an old standard cruiser from the 80s, but it has the 80s ZX6R engine in it, so it doesn't have like a usual V-twin. It has a ZX6R in it. It's, you know, obviously not quite a beginner bike, but it's definitely a slower bike by modern standards. It would have that standard riding position like the bikes that I learned on, but it would also have that inline 4 screen. With that said, I set up a time to see the bike within the hour that I caught it on Craigslist. So me and my dad, we drive over to check it out. And the bike looks good parked. You know, we pull up, it's right there. It's nice and shiny. And somewhere got a little bit more apparent as we got closer to the bike. But, you know, when I threw a leg over it, it actually felt powerful and solid. Like, it fit my frame, it was nice, everything. Thing is, when the bike was started, it was an absolute nightmare. First of all, the bike didn't necessarily want to start, so the owner cranked the choke up all the way to the max, but it still started to die when the throttle was pulled open. So then he started to crank the throttle while the engine was cold, you know, like all the way, and the shit started to smoke heavily. Clearly the carbs, like, they needed some work. And then there was like oil probably being burned somewhere, most likely under the engine, like leaking onto the headers. The bike has style, and you know, they're pretty rare out here, but that's a handshake and a no thank you. I was still interested in the Eliminator though, so I basically just kept my eye out for one for the next couple days. The dude actually hit me up a couple weeks later to tell me that he fixed the bike, but by then I actually already had the bike that I was gonna end up with. So skip ahead after me talking to a couple of other guys about bikes. I spoke to another guy about a Ninja 250. It was a blue 2006. It was in very good condition, but unfortunately, he was a bit shady, so I didn't even go through with the deal. Eventually, I just started to look at shit beyond the Ninjas, you know, like beginner bikes, but not just the Ninja 250, like the V-Star 250, GZ 250, Rebel 250, you know, shit like that, just basic bikes. And I ended up seeing a Rebel 250 for sale in Bed-Stuy. It was in 1986, and the guy wanted $1,500 for it, which, to be honest, speaks to the bubble that motorcycle prices reside in when it comes to NYC. Nonetheless, I was still interested, so I hit the guy up immediately asking if I could see it. So he tells me that he's free the next day. I'm like, cool. It was like the first week of that particular semester in college, so, you know, I'm in class, all cracked out and shit, like, on my fucking bike. So I pull up, and the bike is sitting pretty on the curb. The guy is on his porch. Super cool dude. I took a look at the bike, and he was even cool with me taking it for a test drive. In fact, he was so cool with that he didn't even ask me for the cash first. You know, when you go and look at a bike, it's like, I want the cash in my hand before you take it for a test drive, just in case you don't skip out on me. So he basically gave me the keys to his bike and assumed that I would return with it. Granted, it might be the environment that I came up in where you hope for the best, but ultimately you assume the worst. And he was a fairly well-to-do white dude, so maybe it's just a different thought process. In my head, I'm just like, wow, this dude trusts me. Anyway, by that point, it had probably been like a solid month and a half since I actually rode a motorcycle, so I didn't want to wreck the bike and then have to pay for it if I didn't want it. So I told him I'm just gonna take it around the block real quick, just like one lap around the block. That's all I needed. Yo, as soon as I took off with that bike, man, I was just in love, because a bike that tiny and simple, it basically feels like an abnormally fast bicycle. Like, it's a slow bike, don't get me wrong. You only have like 16 horses to play with, but if you have no real frame of reference, you feel like you're flying. Plus, a bike that lightweight is nimble as shit, dude. I brought it back around the block, I park it. I'm just like, yeah, I'm gonna take this thing. But let's talk price, right? I talked them down from $1,500 to $1,375, which basically means that I had enough money to insure the bike the next day. Looking back, I definitely could have talked them down to at least $1,300 or so, but you know, hindsight is 50-50, right? So he gives me the keys, he jumps in his car, and he lets me ride the bike with his plates back to the east while he follows me, so I can park my bike at my house, and then he'll just take the plates back and drive home. Yo, it was such a fun experience riding that bike and having to navigate Brooklyn. Because remember, I had no real road experience. The MSF course, it lets you learn the mechanics, but you're still in a parking lot, basically. You never really actually touch the road, you know? You stall that bitch in traffic, now everybody's honking and judging you, but your boy never even stalled once that day. The owner was even impressed by it. We took back blocks, basically, you know, Gates Avenue, if you know Brooklyn, and then we jumped on the Broadway. I can't even front, man. I felt super cool. I felt like the coolest guy in the world that day, you know, on that little rebel just... Of course, when my mother gets home, she freaks the fuck out. Mostly because I didn't actually tell anyone that I was gonna go buy the bike. I was walking through the streets with $1,500, and I went to dude's crib by myself, which, granted, isn't the best way to do it. Don't do it like that, kids. Craigslist is unpredictable place. Yo, that first night was hella tense because, remember, even though I had the money for the insurance after negotiating with the guy, it was still in cash. It wasn't on my card, so I couldn't insure the bike yet. I swear to God, yo, every hour I would get up and look out the window to make sure my biggest purchase ever was still even there. The following morning, I deposited the money and I insured the bike. But that left me without money to register the bike and pay the sales tax, so I couldn't even ride my bike. Yo, that first week of owning the bike sucked because even though I had the bike and it was in my possession, I had the title, I had to wait until payday to register. I'm bitter as shit, like taking a train, like, I'm better than this. And this is before, like, this is before, like, I would just say fuck it and just ride it dirty, like, you know, like I did with the next two bikes, allegedly. As you know, payday tends to be on Friday. And also, that's the last day that the DMV is open for the week. So I basically went to the DMV during my lunch break at work. Because, you know, the DMV is in the mall. Like, if you know Brooklyn, like, Atlantic Terminal, you know the DMV is in the mall, like 3 feet from that Target in the same mall. So I had to cheese the shit out of the punch clock. Like, your boy went to get the registration forms, to get a ticket number, and then I went back to work. I filled it out, and then I punched out so I could go back to the DMV and wait. I think I paid like 200 something at the counter, threw the license plate in my bag. I worked the rest of my shift, probably staring at the clock or something. The next morning, I woke up, I suited up, and I walked outside to take my first unsupervised ride ever, and my first ride in over a week. I'm just gonna cut the video in half here because this is actually how I did it last time. I think the video was long enough. And
this allows me to end it on a cliffhanger. Like, ooh, what happened on that first ride?
I'll get into that in part 2. And I promise I won't take a month with this one either. That was... I'll see you on the next one.